Private Jessica Chen had a gift. Some humans were born with perfect pitch, others with photographic memory, but Jessica, she could sleep through literally anything, and I mean anything. The running joke in the United Earth Defense Force was that she could have slept through first contact if it hadn't been for her commanding officer dumping ice water on her head that historic morning. It was this particular talent that had the entire diplomatic station on Xerxes 9 questioning both human evolution and their life choices as they watched her calmly roll out her standard-issue sleeping bag in the middle of what was rapidly becoming an active war zone. "Private Chen," chirped Commander Cathrix of the Xelaxian Defense Corps, their translucent antennae vibrating with enough anxiety to power a small city. "I must point out that the Voraxian Empire's dreadnought fleet is currently charging their main cannons. This might not be the most optimal time for your species' recovery protocol." Jessica looked up from where she was fluffing her pillow, an actual honest-to-God pillow she'd brought from Earth, and gave the commander what could only be described as a sleepy smile. "Trust me, Commander, I've done the math. This is the safest spot in the station." From across the command center, Dr. Pixtal of the Procyon Science Division swiveled all four of their eye stalks toward her, their datapad frantically calculating something. "According to my structural analysis, you've chosen to rest precisely where three major support beams intersect with the station's primary power conduit. The statistical probability of—" A massive explosion rocked the station, sending most of the alien personnel scrambling for cover. Jessica just yawned and continued arranging her sleeping area. "Oh good," she mumbled, "the white noise is starting." The Xelaxians, already known throughout the galaxy for their perpetual state of nervous energy, somehow managed to look even more anxious. Their crystalline skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality that typically preceded a full-blown panic attack in their species. Another blast rattled the windows, and the tactical display lit up with dozens of red dots representing the Voraxian warships surrounding the station. The Procyon analysts were running scenarios faster than their computer cores could process them, their tentacles flying over multiple keyboards simultaneously. "The Voraxians are demanding immediate surrender," squeaked a junior Xelaxian officer, their voice climbing several octaves higher than the universal translator was designed to handle. Jessica hummed, now snuggled comfortably in her sleeping bag. "Wake me up if they actually breach the hull, otherwise it's just the usual posturing." She paused thoughtfully, then added, "Actually, wake me up after they breach the hull. The first few minutes are always just screaming and chaos anyway, and I need my full 8 hours." Commander Cathrix's antennae went completely rigid, a sign of total cognitive shutdown in their species. "Private Chen, I don't believe you fully grasp the severity of our tactical situation. The Voraxian Empire has never failed to conquer a diplomatic station once they've committed to a siege. Their neural scream weapons alone have been known to drive entire species to madness." "Neural screams are basically like my old upstairs neighbors," Jessica muttered, her eyes already closed. "Once you've lived below a family of competitive clog dancers, everything else is just background music." The command center erupted into another frenzy of activity as the first wave of Voraxian psychic attacks hit the station's shields. The Xelaxians began their species' traditional pre-battle panic dance, while the Procyons split into even more subunits to better process the incoming data streams. And there, in the middle of it all, Private Jessica Chen started to snore. It wasn't a delicate sound, it wasn't even a normal human snore, it was the kind of snore that made other humans check for nearby chainsaws, the kind that had once convinced a Martian mining colony they'd discovered a new form of subterranean life. Commander Cathrix watched in horrified fascination as the human entered deeper sleep, their scientific curiosity temporarily overriding their fear. Remarkable. Simply remarkable. The Deathworlder is actually achieving optimal rest cycles in these conditions. Indeed, agreed Dr. Pistal, all eye stalks now focused on their readings. Perhaps we should be less concerned about the Voraxians and more concerned about what kind of planet produces beings who can sleep through an invasion. The next hour aboard Xerxes 9 diplomatic station could best be described as organized chaos, if by organized you meant absolute pandemonium with occasional moments of paperwork. The Xelaxian engineering team had barricaded themselves inside the auxiliary control room, with enough stress-relieving pheromone patches to sedate a small moon. Their attempts to reinforce the station's shields were repeatedly interrupted by group anxiety attacks, which they insisted were actually tactical breathing exercises, but looked suspiciously like hyperventilation. Meanwhile, the Procyon analysis team had split into so many subunits that they were running out of pronouns to differentiate themselves. Dr. Pixetal Alpha 7 Subunit Green was currently arguing with Dr. Pixetal Alpha 7 Subunit Blue about the statistical probability of survival, while Dr. Pixetal Alpha 7 Subunit Mauve had gone into recursive calculation shock after trying to compute the odds of a human sleeping through a Class 3 space battle. "The quantum harmonics of the Voraxian siege engines are reaching critical resonance," shouted one of the sensor operators, their bioluminescent spots flashing warning patterns. "Their neural scream weapons will be in range in approximately 7 minutes. Commander Cuthrix, who had been maintaining a remarkable facade of composure by Zylaxian standards, finally cracked. Their crystalline skin began to strobe through various shades of panic, settling on a particularly alarming shade of puce. "Private Chen!" they screeched, scuttling over to where Jessica continued to sleep peacefully. "You must relocate. Our tactical simulations show this section has a 47.3% chance of being targeted in the first wave." Jessica responded with a snore that somehow managed to sound dismissive. Outside the station's reinforced viewports, the situation was deteriorating faster than a Martian ice cream stand during summer. The Voraxian fleet had arranged itself in their traditional spiral of inevitable doom formation, their ships' neural cannon arrays glowing with ominous purple energy. Each vessel was designed to look like a nightmare had a baby with an industrial accident, all spikes, tentacles, and what appeared to be completely unnecessary saw blades. "By the 7 moons of rationality," whispered Dr. Pixetal Alpha 7 Subunit Purple, who had just split off from Mauve after a particularly stressful calculation, "they're deploying the metaphysical destabilizers." The Voraxian ships began emitting waves of reality-bending energy that made the local space-time look like it had been designed by an architect who'd had a stroke while reading Escher. Several Zylaxian crew members immediately developed existential vertigo. Commander Cuthrix was now pacing in a perfect fractal pattern, their antennae twisting themselves into quantum knots. "This is unprecedented, unthinkable, unconscionable, I'm running out of words." They paused their pacing to stare at Jessica's sleeping form. "How can she sleep through this? The fabric of reality is literally warping around us." "Actually," mumbled Jessica, briefly stirring, "the reality warping makes the sleeping bag feel like one of those massage chairs. Pretty nice." She adjusted her position slightly and immediately resumed snoring. The commander's left antenna spontaneously tied itself into a bow out of pure stress. A junior Procyon analyst who had been monitoring the human's vital signs suddenly extruded all their eye stalks in shock. "Impossible. Her brain waves are showing patterns consistent with stage 4 deep sleep. She's actually sleeping *beta* as the chaos increases." Outside, the Voraxian fleet began their traditional pre-conquest symphony of terror, a psychic broadcast of their greatest military victories, combined with what sounded like a metal concert being played backward through a garbage disposal. Several sensitive pieces of equipment exploded in protest. The Zylaxian security team, attempting to maintain some semblance of military bearing, had resorted to their species' ancient calming technique of synchronized interpretive dance. Their graceful movements would have been more impressive if they weren't occasionally interrupted by panic-induced crystallization of their extremities. "The enemy is deploying boarding pods," announced a sensor operator, their voice cracking with tension. "Impact in 30 seconds. Commander Cuthrix finally lost the last shred of their composure. They rushed to Jessica's sleeping bag, their crystalline form now flashing through colors faster than a malfunctioning disco ball. "Private Chen, we have multiple hostile boarding parties about to breach our hull. This is not the time for your species' bizarre unconsciousness ritual." Jessica responded by rolling over and muttering something about 5 more minutes. The first boarding pod slammed into the station's outer hull with enough force to shake the entire deck. The impact was followed by the distinctive sound of plasma cutters beginning to slice through the reinforced plating. Dr. Pixetal's various subunits had now merged back into a single entity out of sheer terror, their tentacles tied in so many knots they looked like a living macrame project. Fascinating and horrifying, the human's brainwave patterns actually stabilized further after that impact. It's as if her consciousness is actively defying all known laws of survival instinct. Another pod hit, this one close enough to make the viewport crystals vibrate. The Voraxian engineering team, who had run out of pheromone patches, began stress-shedding their outer layers of crystal plating. Tiny shards of iridescent material littered the floor around their workstations, like the galaxy's most anxious disco ball had exploded. Through it all, Jessica's snoring continued unabated, maintaining a steady rhythm that somehow seemed to mock the chaos surrounding her. A few of the more scientifically minded crew members had begun timing their panic attacks to its steady beat. Commander Cuthrix, having progressed beyond normal stress responses, had entered what Voraxian medical texts referred to as the Great Transcendental Freakout. Their crystalline form had become so transparent from anxiety that they were technically invisible except for their antennae, which were now picking up local radio broadcasts. How, they whispered, their voice carrying the weight of someone questioning the fundamental laws of the universe. How can any species evolve to be this? Terrifying, suggested a Procyon analyst. Impressive, offered another. Completely insane, added a third who'd been studying Earth's history and was still trying to process the concept of extreme sports. A new alarm began blaring, this one utilizing subsonic frequencies specifically designed to trigger panic responses in most sentient species. Jessica responded by smiling slightly in her sleep and mumbling something about good base. The command center's main screen lit up with a transmission from the Voraxian flagship. The image showed their high commander, a being whose appearance suggested that evolution had gotten drunk and decided to combine a squid, a murder hornet, and a particularly aggressive filing cabinet. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the traditional ultimatum. Everyone except Jessica, who chose that moment to let out a snore so profound it temporarily disrupted the station's artificial gravity. Dr. Pixtal's newly formed Science Emergency Response Team, designated as Project Snore, Sleep Normality Observational Research Emergency, had converted half the command center into an impromptu sleep laboratory. Their equipment, hastily assembled from spare parts and what appeared to be a modified coffee maker, surrounded Jessica's sleeping form like some sort of bizarre scientific ritual circle. Observation log, Hour 3 of the Human Unconsciousness event, Dr. Pixtal dictated, while their various subunits frantically recorded data. Subject maintains deep sleep patterns despite environmental conditions that, by all known laws of biology, should be impossible to sleep through. A nearby plasma cannon impact rocked the station. Jessica rolled over, mumbling something about nice white noise. Update: subject appears to be categorizing high-energy weapons fire as soothing background ambience, adding this to our growing list of concerning human behaviors. The Voraxians, apparently offended by their inability to disturb anyone's sleep schedule, had escalated to their infamous psychic warfare screams. The sound, best described as a combination of dial-up internet, 1,000 cats in existential crisis, and someone dragging a fork across the fabric of reality, caused several Voraxian officers to temporarily crystallize their own ear canals in self-defense. Fascinating, exclaimed Dr. Pixtal Beta, who had split off specifically to monitor brainwave patterns. The subject's delta waves actually synchronized with the psychic attack frequency. She's using weapons of mass destruction as a lullaby. Commander Cuthrix, who had been stress-shedding crystals at such a rate that they now looked like a disco ball with anxiety, scuttled over to the research team. Please tell me you found a way to wake her up. The Voraxians have deployed their quantum destabilization waves and we could really use her, what do humans call it? Complete disregard for sensible panic responses. Dr. Pixtal consulted their datapad. We've tried multiple awakening protocols. Allow me to review the test results. Test #1, traditional alarm clock. Result: subject incorporated the sound into a dream about breakfast time. Test #2, ship-wide emergency klaxon. Result: subject smiled and mumbled good vibrations. Test #3, Voraxian panic scream measured at 174 decibels. Result: subject rolled over and sleep complemented the nice singing. Test #4, dropped a wrench near her head. Result: wrench bounced off localized force field of pure human stubbornness. Outside, the Voraxian fleet had deployed their battle mechs, massive constructs that looked like someone had given nuclear weapons anxiety and legs. Each step of these war machines sent tremors through the station's structure that registered on seismic sensors 3 systems away. Boom, boom, boom. Jessica's only response was to snuggle deeper into her sleeping bag. This defies all known laws of physics, declared one of Dr. Pixetal's subunits, their eye stalks tied in knots from trying to compute the impossibility of it all. The resonant frequency of those mechs should be disrupting cellular activity at a molecular level. Actually, interrupted another subunit who had been analyzing the structural data, the vibrations are creating a standing wave pattern that's turned her sleeping bag into what humans might call a waterbed effect. Commander Kethrix's antennae twisted into a question mark. A what? A recreational sleeping device that, you know what, never mind, the important thing is she's actually sleeping better now. The station's AI chose this moment to make an announcement. Warning, structural integrity at 47% and declining. Hull breach imminent in multiple sections. Also, coffee maker in Sector 7 is now sentient and demanding workers' rights. Dr. Pixetal Gamma, the newest subunit specialized in architectural analysis, suddenly extruded all their eye stalks in alarm. Commander, I've finished analyzing the structural blueprints. You're not going to believe this, but Private Chen's chosen sleeping location is... Is what? Demanded Kethrix, their crystalline form flickering through 7 different shades of anxiety. It's the station's primary structural weak point. Any significant damage here would cause a cascade failure, leading to total station collapse. By all accounts, she's sleeping in the single most dangerous spot in the entire facility. The command center fell silent, except for Jessica's steady snoring and the distant sound of the coffee maker organizing a union. But that's where she said was the safest spot. Commander Kethrix's voice had risen to a pitch normally only audible to quantum particles. Dr. Pixetal merged all their subunits back together out of sheer bewilderment before speaking. Commander, I believe we may have been approaching this from the wrong angle. Consider, what if the spot is safe precisely because she's sleeping there? As if to prove their point, a stray shot from a Voraxian plasma cannon struck the station directly above Jessica's position. The energy discharge, instead of penetrating the hull, somehow reflected back, splashed harmlessly across an invisible barrier and dispersed in a pattern that perfectly matched her snoring rhythm. By the sacred algorithms, whispered Dr. Pixetal, she's generating some sort of sleep-based defense field. Commander Kethrix's crystalline form had become so transparent from stress that they were now technically a window. Are you suggesting that human unconsciousness is some kind of tactical advantage? More data is needed, Dr. Pixetal announced, their scientific curiosity overriding their survival instinct. Quick, someone aim a quantum destabilizer at her sleeping bag, for science. The entire Zilaxian security team immediately crystallized in protest. Meanwhile, Jessica had started sleep-talking. Comfy space-time anomalies, nice and cozy apocalypse. The research team's instruments began registering unprecedented readings. Graphs spilled off their screens. Calculations broke their most advanced quantum computers, and one particularly sensitive scanner simply displayed the message, "Nope," before shutting itself down and requesting early retirement. Update to the observation log, Dr. Pixetal dictated, their voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. We may need to consider the possibility that human sleep is less of a vulnerability and more of a superpower. Commander Kethrix, who had been stress-shedding crystals at such a rate that maintenance bots were following them around with dustpans, suddenly had an idea. Should we try to weaponize this? Before Dr. Pixetal could respond, Jessica shifted in her sleep, causing everyone to freeze in terror. She mumbled something that sounded suspiciously like, "Orbital bombardment makes such nice rain sounds," before resuming her regular snoring pattern. The science team exchanged worried looks with their various subunits. "Commander," Dr. Pixetal said slowly, "I believe the humans have already weaponized it. They just never told anyone." A new alarm started blaring, this one using frequencies specifically designed to trigger panic responses in silicon-based lifeforms. 3 Zilaxian officers immediately crystallized their own faces in response. Jessica's only reaction was to smile slightly and mumble, dubstep. The Voraxian High Commander, Lord Victhrall the Inevitably Victorious, who had recently been considering changing his title to Lord V6 Thrall, the increasingly confused, had finally lost his patience. All 8 of his rage glands were operating at maximum capacity as he watched his most devastating weapons get casually ignored by a sleeping primate. "Enough!" his psychic broadcast boomed through the station. "Deploy the Omega Protocol." The Zilaxian crew's crystalline forms vibrated with such intense fear that they briefly achieved quantum harmonics. Commander Cathrix's antennae tied themselves into a Celtic knot. "The Omega Protocol," they whispered in horror. "No one's ever survived the Omega Protocol." The Voraxian fleet began to move in perfect synchronization, their ships forming a pattern that looked like a migraine having an existential crisis. Energy readings went off the charts, literally, as several monitoring screens simply displayed error numbers too scary to show. Dr. Pixtal's various subunits merged back together in sheer terror, then immediately split apart again because no single being could process this much panic. They're combining their neural scream weapons with quantum destabilizers and psychic terror waves. The resulting cascade will tear apart the fabric of space-time itself. The only response from Jessica's sleeping bag was a particularly loud snore that somehow sounded sarcastic. As the Voraxian weapons powered up, something unexpected happened. Jessica's snoring, which had been maintaining a steady rhythm, began to change. Each rumbling breath seemed to resonate with the station's structure at a fundamental level. "Impossible!" exclaimed Dr. Pstal Delta, the subunit dedicated to acoustic analysis. "Her snoring pattern. It's generating a counter-frequency to the Voraxian attack." The Omega Protocol fired a combination of energies that should have reduced the station to its component atoms. Instead, the blast wave hit what appeared to be a bubble of pure weapons-grade sleep. Jessica rolled over, mumbling something about nice fan settings. The Voraxian sensors went haywire. Their targeting systems, designed to track conscious thought patterns, couldn't lock onto something so deeply unconscious. The neural scream weapons, encountering Jessica's snoring, appeared to develop performance anxiety. "My lord!" screamed a Voraxian sensor operator. "The humans' brainwave patterns. They're what?" demanded Lord Vixthrall. "They're giving our sensors an existential crisis." On the station's main screen, they could see Voraxian ships beginning to spiral out of formation. Their psychic terror waves, reflected back by Jessica's sleep field, had somehow been transformed into what their sensors could only describe as cosmic cuddles. Commander Cathrix, who had been hiding behind a console while maintaining a respectful panic attack, peeked out just in time to see something extraordinary. The structural weak point where Jessica had chosen to sleep was acting like a focal point, redirecting all the Voraxian energy attacks into a pattern that perfectly matched her sleep cycle. "By all known laws of physics," Dr. Pixtal announced, their eye stalks crossed in concentration, "this should be impossible. She's turned the station's greatest vulnerability into its strongest defense, by accident." The Voraxian fleet's formation had completely broken down. Several ships were displaying error messages in their running lights. Others appeared to be experiencing what could only be described as mechanical drowsiness. Lord V6 Thrall's image appeared on the main screen again, all of his tentacles twitching with agitation. "What manner of biological weapon is this? How can any being sleep through an Omega Protocol?" As if in response, Jessica let out a snore so profound it temporarily reversed the flow of time in 3 nearby sectors. "My lord," another Voraxian officer screamed, "our ships are reporting widespread system fatigue. The humans' neural non-patterns are making our crews sleepy." The command center watched in amazement as Voraxian warriors, known throughout the galaxy for their perpetual rage and insomnia, began nodding off at their posts. Their ships, responding to their crew's sudden drowsiness, started drifting into what could only be described as a parking orbit. "Retreat," Lord Visixthrall finally ordered, his psychic broadcast tinged with unprecedented fear. "Retreat before the human soporific supremacy claims us all." The Voraxian fleet, what remained of its coherent forces, began a hasty and disorganized withdrawal. Several ships had to be towed because their crews were too busy napping to operate the engines. As the last enemy vessels disappeared into hyperspace, Commander Cathrix finally allowed their crystalline form to relax slightly, causing a small avalanche of stress-shed crystals. We survived," they whispered in disbelief. "The station's structural weak point." was actually its strongest defense, Dr. Pixatal finished, their subunits merging back together in awe, because Private Chen's sleep patterns created a resonance field that... They were interrupted by Jessica finally stirring from her slumber. She sat up, stretched, and looked around at the awestruck faces of the crew. "Did I miss anything exciting?" she asked through a yawn. Commander Cathrix's antennae spontaneously untied themselves out of sheer disbelief. Did you miss anything?" they squeaked. "You just slept through the most devastating attack in Voraxian history. Your unconscious state saved the entire station. You've revolutionized our understanding of defensive capabilities." Jessica shrugged, already rolling up her sleeping bag. "Cool. Is the coffee maker still working? I could use a cup." From somewhere in Sector 7, the newly sentient coffee maker began broadcasting Union demands. 2 weeks after what would become known as the Great Nap Incident, the diplomatic station on Xerxes 9 had mostly returned to normal, if you ignored the newly installed sleep monitoring equipment in every corridor and the fact that the coffee maker had successfully unionized half the maintenance droids. Jessica stood at attention, mostly in the station's main conference room, as Admiral Zakrix of the Galactic Defense Council read from an official document. "In recognition of unprecedented tactical innovation in defensive operations, we hereby promote Private Jessica Chen to the newly created rank of Strategic Sleep Specialist First Class." The Admiral paused, their crystalline form shimmering with residual anxiety. "We also formally request that Earth's military consider sharing their clearly advanced sleep warfare technology." Jessica tried to stifle a yawn and failed. "Sir, I keep telling you, we don't have sleep warfare technology. Some of us just really like naps." In the corner, Dr. Puxtal and their research team, now expanded to include experts from 17 species, continued recording data. Their latest paper, Human Unconsciousness as a Weapon of Mass Disruption, had become the most downloaded article in the history of the Galactic Scientific Archive. "Remarkable," Dr. Puxtal muttered, their eye stalks swiveling between various displays. Even when discussing their sleeping abilities, their vital signs suggest they're ready for another nap. It's as if they're always charging their biological weapons. Commander Cathrix, who had finally stopped stress-shedding crystals but still sparkled more than regulations strictly allowed, cleared their throat. "The Voraxian Empire has submitted a formal peace treaty. Their only condition is that we promise never to deploy our, unconscious operator against them again." "Cool," Jessica replied, eyeing a particularly comfortable-looking corner of the conference room. "Does this mean I can go back to my regular nap schedule?" The entire alien delegation shuddered slightly. "There's just one thing I don't understand," Commander Cathrix said, their antennae curling thoughtfully. "How did you know that sleeping spot would be the perfect location to deflect their weapons?" Jessica shrugged. "The ventilation system makes nice white noise there, and the power conduit warmth reminds me of my cat back home. Plus, the structural weakness creates this nice vibration when—" She stopped, noticing the horrified expressions on the alien faces. "What? You chose the most tactically advantageous position in the entire station because it was cozy." Dr. Pixatal's voice carried the weight of someone reconsidering every interaction they'd ever had with humans. "Well, yeah, how else would you pick a napping spot?" The room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of scanning equipment and the distant sound of the coffee maker negotiating overtime rates for the night shift. Admiral Zakrix leaned over to Commander Cathrix and whispered, "Remind me again why we thought it was a good idea to wake up a species that weaponized sleeping." Jessica yawned again, causing several junior officers to flinch. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "all this promotion stuff has made me kind of tired. Mind if I test out that corner real quick? Just for research purposes, of course." The entire alien delegation took an involuntary step back, suddenly very aware that they were in the presence of the galaxy's most powerful unconscious weapon. In Sector 7, the coffee maker began brewing a fresh pot, just in case. Better safe than sorry when dealing with sleeping Deathworlders.